All right, so I had a student send me a painting he did of his daughter, and he said he was struggling to get it to look right. So I decided to paint it myself to help teach him and demonstrate things that he could improve at. So in this video, I'm going to use this example to show you 10 things that you can do to make your portrait paintings better and really bring them to life. That sound good? All right, first tip, before we even get into painting, let's talk about the photo reference, because you can make things a lot harder or easier based on the photo you choose. Now, I know a lot of times if you're doing a commission for somebody, they choose the photo, but if you know what to look for in a photo, maybe you can help guide them to choose a better photo or say, hey, this photo will translate better into a painting. So in this photo, you can see it was using a flash. Just in general, stay away from photos that have a flash. The lighting is just very soft. There's no distinct light and shadow, which makes painting it easier. I mean, distinct light and shadow makes painting anything easier. You know, why do you think people always like simple still lifes with, a direct light? Because it creates simple light and shadow. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that's the first thing that I do is I block out the light and shadow. Same goes for a portrait. This doesn't mean that you have to put a light perfectly sideways on the person, creating half of their face in shadow and half of it in light. It could be mostly in shadow, it could be mostly in light. But when you can distinctively see which are the shadow shapes and which are the light shapes, it's gonna get you off to a more organized and clearer start to your painting. Actually, an exercise I have my students do in my courses is, and actually an exercise I frequently have students do in my courses is paint a portrait made just of light and shadow shapes. You really want to start seeing the portrait in terms of value shapes. Since there isn't distinct light and shadow in this photo, it's gonna make it difficult to portray the form, because we portray the form using values. Using darks and lights is how you're going to show the shape of something. So the less of those you have, or the closer they are, kind of the better you gotta be to pull it off. All right, tip number 2, in portraits, try to avoid lines. Meaning you don't really want to paint in lines. You wanna create lines by putting the right value of shapes next to each other. The students, you can see, have harsh lines under the nose, the eyes, the chin, and some wrinkles. They actually did a good job of portraying the form in other areas of the portrait using just shapes. I kind of wish you would have used that more in these other areas. And this process of laying down shapes starts right at the beginning. When I first start adding color, I'm thinking of big shapes. I'm working wet into wet paint. I'm not afraid to bleed shapes into other shapes. I'm not outlining anything. And as the painting progresses, I get more specific with my shapes and more specific with my values. But at no point am I ever going in and drawing in a line. Now, the skin tones in a student's portrait are actually pretty good, but if you struggle with skin tones, I'm not gonna get into in this video because I offer the skin tone lesson from my portrait course for free. If you want to check that out, there's a link to it in the description of this video. All right, tip number 3 is understand the planes of the face. Understanding these is going to completely change how you look at portrait painting. It was actually the favorite exercise of the students that took my portrait course. I got the most feedback from that exercise and the most people saying like, whoa, like this makes everything make a whole lot more sense. And I think it helps so much because photos leave out so much information. I mean, just looking at a 2-dimensional photograph, not a 3-dimensional head, real life, the form of it isn't going to be as clear. And knowing these planes is gonna help you see more and help you better construct the form of the face. An example of this is the plane that is below the brow bone and between the eyes. And the students, they just continued the same plane going all the way through. Whereas in mine, I made sure to indicate a subtle plane change. It's pretty much not even visible in the photo, but since I know that it's there to some degree, I can put that in there. Another example are these 3 planes above the eye. Since I know those, I can make sure to change the value in the appropriate spot to better portray that form. These are small things, but they really add up. And if you pay attention to all of these, by the end of the painting, they add up to a much better likeness. Looking back at older portraits of mine where I was like, why doesn't this look like the person? What am I doing wrong? A lot of times it was I just didn't understand the planes. I kept looking to the photograph to give me the answers, but the answers weren't there. You need to have a base understanding of these planes to fill in the gaps that every photo is gonna leave out. Now, this next tip is linked to the previous tip, which is be mindful of the direction of your brush strokes. I don't just arbitrarily put in brush strokes. I put them in with the plane in mind. And I'm trying to think of it as if I am putting my brush physically on the plane in 3-dimensional space. And I'm trying to communicate that form with my brushwork and the direction it goes. And I always think at the beginning of the painting, I am pushing the paint, opposed to the end of the painting where I'm applying the paint. Meaning at the beginning when I'm pushing the paint is thinner, I'm working wet into wet paint, I'm pushing it around, I'm bleeding edges and shapes together. Whereas at the end of the painting, I'm laying down a mark with the intention of leaving it there, almost like if you would lay down a sticker. I get the question a lot, like, how do I improve my brushwork in my portraits? Or like, how do I paint portraits in a simple style? And my answer to that is make your brush strokes go in the right direction. And the way you're gonna know it's the right direction is by understanding the planes. All right, next tip is do your best to try and think and draw in 3D, not 2D. What I mean is that we can get really caught up in trying to accurately draw something 2-dimensionally, meaning just the base outline and shape of that thing, when we should be thinking about what it looks like 3-dimensionally and drawing it that way. For example, with the mouth, most beginners will see it as an opening on a flat surface. And they will try to see the lines of the mouth and the outline of it and try and accurately draw that as just a flat shape on their canvas. When if they thought about it 3-dimensionally, the fact that the corners of the mouth are going back into the face and out of the light, so it's going to be darker in the corners, and just the perspective of the lips as they go back into the face, it's going to help you draw it in better and help you paint it better. Even the area above the mouth, and understanding that it's curved and that you need to indicate that with the appropriate value changes is going to be big. It's easy to look at it in a photo, especially a softly lit photo, and think that it's just a flat surface. Coming back to that previous tip, this is also going to influence your brushwork. If you're thinking about your brushwork as wrapping it around the subject like paper mache, it's going to influence your brushwork to communicate more form. All right, gonna stick around the mouth for the next tip, which is simplify the teeth when you paint them. You don't wanna go in and draw in every single tooth and paint it in. It's much better to, at first, think of the teeth as a mouthpiece, just one solid mass, like when you put an orange peel in your mouth. Think of it like that first and get the appropriate values to portray the form of the corners going back into the mouth and getting darker. Then after you get that base form, then you can go in and indicate the gums and certain gaps in the teeth where necessary. And I think you'll be surprised at how simple you can paint teeth and they still read. Also with teeth, don't make them too bright. I know nobody wants to paint somebody with dirty teeth, but if you make them very bright, it's gonna look off. You can see in my painting, there's a lot of color happening in the teeth. All right, tip number 7 is look for soft edges with hair. And as students, everywhere there's hair, the edge is very harsh and crisp. And if they would have softened a lot of those edges, it would read more as hair. Especially with a photo like this where there isn't much information in the hair, it's kind of all masked out. So being able to soften the edges will do a lot in communicating the hair. Even on the hairline, I'm always working the paint of the skin into the paint of the hair to get that soft edge. Also with the eyebrows, you can see mine are a lot thinner, not as dark as theirs, and getting those soft edges on the eyebrows even will go a long way. If you struggle painting hair, I've actually made a whole video on it where I paint different versions of Brad Pitt's hair. If you wanna check that out, I'll put a link to it above right now. But moving on to tip number 8 is at some point during your painting, preferably in the first third at the beginning stages, work on it upside down. I pretty much do this on every portrait at some point. In this one, you can see I did it relatively early on. Like I haven't fully defined the features yet. I haven't even painted in the eyes because I want to be able to see the correct shapes. Like putting it upside down is gonna help you see the correct shapes, the correct angles, and the correct alignment of everything. I actually took the opportunity to put in the whites of the eyes while it was upside down because I wanted to make sure that I had them in the right place. And putting it upside down was gonna help me see that better. All right, tip number 9 is something I wish I would have learned long ago, which is paint the eyes softer. You don't want to outline the eye at any point. Like a lot of people think they have to, draw the eye and then paint it in. Really try to build the eye as you paint. And look for soft edges. I mean, you'll see like a lot of color of the eyeball being very similar in color and value to the skin around the eye. Like there won't be a very harsh defined difference between the eyeball and the eyelid. You can take a look at some master painters and how they painted eyes and how soft certain areas are and how close the colors and values are to each other. A lot of times it's like the color of the skin melts into the color of the eye. And really trying to think about the eye as just a collection of shapes and not get so caught up in painting them so sharp. You know, if you get the base shapes right, you'll be surprised at how little you need to do to communicate the eyes. And again, like everything else, understanding the form of the eye and the shapes and the planes, it's gonna make it a lot easier for you to paint it simply. All right, and tip number 10 is make the background simple. In students painting, I think they tried to do a little too much with the background and it can take away from the portrait. You know, you're doing a portrait, the main thing you want the viewer to look at is the face. And I get a lot of people asking me questions about backgrounds, like how do you choose your background? How do you choose the color? What if you're using a photo of somebody and it's not a solid background? When I'm painting from a photo where the background isn't just a solid color, I will choose a color that I see in the background. Hopefully it's a color that I can see reflected in the face somewhere to make the background. And I actually want to get it in relatively early because a lot of times you're going to see that color reflected in the portrait somewhere. And you want the background in the face to be operating in the same space. If you just paint the portrait and then try and throw in a background afterwards, you run the risk of it looking like the portrait was cut out and just like pasted on some paper or something. And I also use the background while I'm painting. Like I use it to compare colors and values. I use it to soften edges on hair. And I feel like whenever I put the background in, I also try and choose a color that is a complement of the colors that I see in the face. So a lot of times if I see a lot of reds or oranges or yellows in the face, I'll try and go with like a blue or green type background, but I also try and keep it desaturated. I don't want it to be a very like bright green or blue background that's gonna take attention away from the face. But that's just me. That's kind of what I go by. So that's 10 tips. If you use some of these tips and paint a portrait yourself and feel like they help, and you post your painting on Instagram, please tag me at Forza43 or use the hashtag PaintCoach. I would love to see it. All right, I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.